Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. I would like to really thank both INSEAD and SEV for giving me this honor. My role is to talk about the independent non-executive director and how he or she are an integral part of the modern firm. And of course, I'll be talking about my experience and my experience only. But I would like to start with a personal confession, and that might be the most important thing that I say this whole intervention. And that is that I, as an individual, both as an individual and as a professional, I have been tremendously enriched by my involvement in these boards and my involvement with these managers, these executives, these other board members, the other stakeholders. Really, I have learned so much from them, and this is a message that should go also to anyone out there who is interested in possibly doing that. It's amazing educational experience. Having said that, I'm supposed to tell you what it's like that to be an independent member, and then you can probably figure out how much value such an individual adds into the modern corporation. So I think I moved this. So how did we get here in order for us to talk about corporate governance and independent directors and so on here? So originally there was the one man or one woman show, one person doing pretty much everything, but that's really the past. But nowadays what we have is a very complex modern corporation where we have separate ownership, separate management with whatever differences this may bring in objectives. In fact, the ownership could be also dispersed, so not all shareholders can be there or can afford to be there to oversee the management, and some may be more powerful than others. And some of them may have long-term perspectives, some of them may have short-term perspectives, so the horizon can be very different and may be a different indicator of what they would like to focus on. And also in a modern corporation, one has a complex, sometimes model of multiple stakeholders. So this has led to the practice of the modern practice of corporate governance, of which I'm not an expert. Ludo here is the expert. So I will be just talking about my personal experience practicing it. What does this corporate governance, what has this corporate governance done? Well, it has devised different compensation schemes that are there to align managerial directives, and these are alignments with the shareholders and with a long-term value creation perspective. It has put there the board of directors, whose job as a body it is to exercise the strategy and the control. In fact, in the dinner that we had last night, some called it the vision. So strategy might be called also the vision. And it has put in that board these non-executive directors, so people from outside the company who are basically taking on personal responsibility to see to that company's success and to create value for that company. So first, what is the job of the non-executive director? Because a lot of the staff that I will be talking about today are there, whether you're independent or non-independent non-executive director. And I would say, without certainly being exhaustive, we are there to constructively challenge and monitor management. We are there to basically safeguard the integrity of the financial information, to make sure that there are robust and defensible financial controls and systems of risk management, and also in a well-governed corporation to have a key impact on the executive directors and also senior management through affecting their levels of remuneration, their appointment, their removal, and also in their succession planning. So that's what the non-executive director is doing within this complex corporation. What is the independent non-executive director? So let me spend one slide on this. What is independent? So now, a key thing, and I have it here as my first bullet point, and actually Mr. Fessas also mentioned it, there is character. And I'm not going to start talking to you about character. I think we all know more or less what character means, and whether someone has the right character for a corporation and someone has an independent character for adding to the board of directors. But this is probably the most important thing in judging someone whether they can be independent or not. And then there are some more specific things, like it excludes the possibility for this individual to have any stock, or let's say very minimal, allowing very minimal stock in the company, no financial interest whatsoever, not have been a past executive of this company or a past client, and not have family ties with any of the senior executives currently in the company. A very important part of the independence criterion is also remuneration, to which I will come back later. It certainly has to be non-variable and director's fee only, nothing else, no strings attached. And something that we do, at least in Titan, it comes from a certain code, not to be an old-timer. So in Titan, for example, we put a limit to independence at 9 years. After the 9th year, you're basically not independent anymore. And I'll come back to this. So the key thing then is to basically have their, not just non-executive directors, but to have individuals who will perform these tasks in a manner of independence. How do you ensure that? Well, it's the criteria that I said before. And what do you achieve having done that? Well, you escape any adverse incentives or moral hazard that may be generated due to these separations that exist in the modern corporation, and have individuals who are able to focus on long-term value of the company, and in some cases at least who can serve or can interact with multiple stakeholders. Now, I mentioned stakeholders, and that is a very key thing of why this modern corporate governance is important, and why you need people other than either the owners or the executives to deal with issues of directing a corporation. But let me mention who are these important stakeholders that the board, and especially an independent director, should be involved in. And of course, first and foremost, it's the shareholders, but then one could add, should add the employees, the civil society, in most cases regulator or regulators. There could be many regulators involved in a company, and of course many others that are potential stakeholders other than shareholders. If you have a lender, he's a stakeholder too. You have to basically cater to them also. Now, to judge the importance or the contribution of an independent non-executive director, one has to basically say a few things or understand a few things about the different companies. So different types of companies have different needs and also have different value creation, extents of value creation from independent directors. So I give here a typology of this type of this company. So you can have differences in terms of, let's say, ownership. There are listed companies, there are private equity-backed companies, and there are family-owned companies. This affects very much what are the needs of this particular company, and also how, for example, it should be financed. Another very important element, is it a young company or is it a mature company? Is it regulated, or is it not regulated, or how heavily regulated is it? Is it in the private sector or in the public sector? And finally, what is its exposure to civil society? And there I mean particularly, but not exclusively, what are potential environmental and social issues that could be involved in the operations or the investments of these companies that basically invite the scrutiny of other types of stakeholders. Okay, so having said that, let me say some remarks about my experience in being involved as an independent non-executive director. I feel that you know, this type of role is definitely one when it's successful, guarantees the focus of the individual on long-term value creation. The individual is able to address stakeholders other than shareholders, and this is particularly true, for example, in the case of regulators in the financial sector. I believe that individuals that are independent non-executive directors are indispensable in performing the function of control over the internal audit, external audit, and the risk function in preparation, of course, for the board, preparing the board for this, and are also quite valuable in terms of either enhancing or bringing the appropriate values or culture, sometimes from outside, into the organization. I have always found in my experience as a non-executive independent director that the issue of compensation is very important. So that how these individuals like me in these boards are compensated is, to me, I think, extremely important. I found that this compensation has to be high enough in order to make the individual you know, attracted and to be able to maintain interest in doing the job, but it has to be low enough so that this individual does not get captured by this the corporate culture. Now, where is the point where these two meet? It's impossible to tell, and it's a little bit of an art. But for me, this is one of the most important things of being independent. Also, I have found that, in my experience at least, as an independent director, I have brought, or at least I have thought I have brought, more value to young firms as opposed to mature firms. And that is because the independent director in a young firm, sometimes, you know, just a created firm, can act as an internal management consultant, can enhance, can help in the development of the values of the new company, and can do this cross-semination of his or her experience from other similar companies or even dissimilar companies into the new company. Also, I have found that the role of the independent non-executive director is much more it's de facto more powerful in heavily regulated industries. So certainly listed companies are regulated. They're regulated by the Capital Markets Commission. But the financial sector, whether listed or not, is even more heavily regulated, because you have, of course, either the Bank of Greece or the single supervising mechanism that is on top of that. And there, I think the role of the independent director is really indispensable. I have found in my experience that companies with good corporate governance have enjoyed better access to finance. And this has been, I've read it in academic writings and published in academic journals, where basically has been shown that, for example, institutional investors that are considering investing, buying the share of a listed company, they definitely look at the corporate governance indexes and accomplishments of the company very carefully. But also, as when I was, from the lender side, as a banker, I certainly know that when we were considering extending loans to corporations, looking at their corporate governance and how successful that was, how satisfactory that was an extremely important part of our decision whether to extend financing or not to that particular company. I will finish with one remark, which is a little bit, one might say, weird, but I have been very privileged, blessed actually, to have been in companies or in the boards of companies where the principals believed in me and in the others there, and in the fact that, in the expectation that we would be value creating. That is an extremely important part of what an independent, how an independent non-executive director can contribute. If you do not have this culture where the principal, and here by principal I mean whether this is the owner or whether this is the shareholder, or many times even the regulator, if they do not believe that these people bring in value, it's quite difficult for a board of independent non-executive directors to bring in value. And I think that this, together with my first remark, which is very personal in many respects, might be the biggest conclusion that I have from my own experience. It's a process which is the process of adopting the right corporate governance. It's very much an evolutionary one. It's impossible to ask a company that doesn't have so much involvement in this modern corporate governance architecture to basically just all of a sudden start believing that this is going to work. But once it gets to a point where it accepts that perhaps these people, through the process that has been very aptly described by Mr. Petropoulos, can actually add to the value, then the actual creation of value by the individuals, the independent individuals there, is definitely much higher. Thank you very much.